My name is Denisha Salcedo, 2018 Regional Teacher of the Year, PSESD. Actually, same cohort as Melissa. Melissa?
Melissa Charette. I'm ESD 113 Regional Teacher of the Year for 2018. Both Denisha and I came from the 2018 cadre of teachers, and we know firsthand the talent that lies across the state. And so are very honored and humbled to be among them.
Yes, and before we even get started with introducing our amazing keynote speaker, I'm actually going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to start with our closing activity, which is an answer garden. So David's going to go ahead and pop that into the chat for, already done, into the chat for us. And as you have spent the day with us reimagining education, we'd like for you to participate in this answer garden by helping us understand how you now, what word comes to mind when you think about reimagining education. And if you want to go ahead and share your screen and we can kind of watch this grow. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we move in to the answer garden. You will be receiving a follow-up email this coming week from CSTEP with the conference evaluation survey, which really hope you fill out, as well as information regarding clock hours. The sessions were recorded today and will be made available on CSTEP's website in the coming weeks. And as soon as they're available, we'll email you and let you know. I won't email you, they will. And also please make sure to join our post-conference on Twitter. It'll be a Twitter chat starting at about 4:30 using the hashtag WATAC 2021. And there will be posted questions about today's conference and an opportunity for us to all reflect. So the answer garden that you see in front of you is just after today's conference, blank describes how I reimagine education. And as you type in your words, we'll start to see our garden grow. As we are doing that, Melissa and I have the opportunity, the luxury to get to introduce our keynote speaker. So Melissa, we know that one thing that all former Teachers of the Year have in common, that they all have the passion for building relationships and making a difference in students' lives.
One undeniable quality of our keynote speaker. Brooke Brown says, engaging students in her classroom by centering each student's rich experiences to encourage them to recognize the values in themselves.
And she says that fostering a safe environment for students to develop critical thinking skills and to have critical conversations is fundamental to her approach.
She very much wanted to be that teacher she needed growing up.
Let's give it up for the woman of the hour, the educator of steel, a powerful woman of color, ethnic studies Power Ranger, and a gift to the classroom, Brooke Brown, Washington State 2021 Teacher of the Year.
Woo!
That was such a beautiful intro. Thanks, y'all. Denisha's paying homage to the fact that I always wanted to be the pink Power Ranger. So, so thank you so much. Just honored to be here. Just grateful. Can y'all see my screen?
Yes. And can we turn off our camera so we can give you the spotlight? Would that be, are you okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. So first of all, so we're reimagining education in a time of disruption. And so such a timely title for this conference. And so let me just see, I'm trying to get my view here. Let me see. Okay, there we go. All right. So first off, I just wanted to start by just saying thank you. Thank you to all the powerful educators who just serve tirelessly for all of our students, who in the midst of a global pandemic pivoted just on a night's notice, very short notice, to just bring their instruction online, who have been some of the most creative, innovative, encouraging, inspirational teachers that I have seen just doing incredible work on behalf of our students every day. So I know this is the beginning of Teacher Appreciation Week, so such a beautiful time to just remember to pause and just to really say thank you. Thank you for all of your work. Thank you for everything that you do. And on a Sunday, y'all are here, and I'm just grateful to be in community with all of you. So as Denisha and Melissa said, I'm the 2021 Washington State Teacher of the Year, but there's teachers in my building that I would say far surpass me. And so this is just a humbling recognition. It's an honor, but I am who I am just because of everyone who's poured into me, everyone who I continue to learn with and learn from and community with. And so I just wanted to first start off today and just say thank you. So I like to start off every presentation with this reminder, with this quote. This is Sonia Renee Taylor. She wrote "The Body is Not an Apology." If you haven't read it yet, the second edition just came out. But it says, "We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and all of nature." And this quote really helps to keep me rooted in that it helps me to center my ability to make change happen. So much is going on around us. 2020, like we're in month 5 of 2021. The pandemic has claimed over 3 million lives worldwide, over 500,000 in the US. There's a climate crisis happening. Racism's pervasive in so many areas of our life. We need justice for Dante Wright, Ma'Khia Bryant, Breonna Taylor, so many names who've become hashtags to bring light to the fact that their lives, in fact, do have value. They matter, and they were taken from us. Sometimes I dread logging into Twitter, logging into social media, just because I see so much harm. It feels all-consuming at times. But there are days that I want to lock the doors and curl up with my kids and try to protect them, to try to keep them home, keep them safe. But really, that's an illusion of safety. So instead, I teach them about their history, about how they came from great inventors and brilliance, people who are creative and talented and have so much joy. But I will also have to teach them about racism because they've experienced it. Sexism, ableism, we could go on and on. We have to understand that as a society, racism and all forms of oppression don't just harm folks of color, they really make us all sick. And so really thinking about grief. So during the building closure last spring, I read this article that helped me to name what all of our students were going through: grief. I teach 12th grade, so I walked alongside so many young people as they had their plans for spring sports, prom, graduation canceled. They were crushed, they were sad. Really creating that space online with remote learning to let them reflect and share how they were feeling helped me to grieve as well. And that was at the forefront of the time that we spent together. And I have a 12th grader this year who's navigating all of these similar things. So a question that I really want us to continue to ask is, how can we make sure that we don't miss the opportunity that this pandemic has presented us? This once in a lifetime global health crisis has shut so many things down. How do we make sure that we stitch that new garment? How do we make sure we are all making sure that school is a place where all of our students feel like they belong and bring their whole selves into the classroom? So along with the grief that we felt this past year, I think we also started to feel some gratitude. And so part of the struggle with this time period has been, for some of us, might be realizing that there's more despair, there's more sort of things happening than we may have realized before. So gratitude really helps us to think about the things that have been positive, the opportunities that have come from this really difficult time, and really thinking about how we can leverage that joy. So one thing that's really come out for me during this time and really thinking about reimagining education is, how can we really leverage joy as resistance? How can we make space for joy? So in the midst of grief, how can we also make space for joy? So joy is enduring through through crisis. It's deeper than happiness, but it's something that we have to pursue. It's really giving space to really identify and appreciate the meaningful aspects of life that we might have ignored before. We might have been in too much of a rush to really be able to appreciate. So some questions as we reimagine, I want us to think about, how are you creating space for joy in your own life? How are you creating space in your classrooms with your colleagues to create space in their lives? How can we encourage them in the things they're good at? How can we meet them at their sadness and help them to develop what they are becoming? And so parts of the ways that we can do that is thinking about, how can we embrace non-binary thinking? How can we be more creative? How can we really begin to imagine? So many jobs that our students will be preparing for don't even exist yet. So how can we continue to help our students to think outside of the box, to think for themselves, to really think critically? So a little bit about me before we get going too far. So this is me as a kid. I was born in Seattle. I've been here in Tacoma since third grade. We moved here in third grade. But what and Melissa and Denisha both alluded to this at the beginning, but really thinking about, I became an educator because I want to be that teacher that I needed when I was growing up. And so when I enter spaces, when I'm doing the work, when I'm ever talking with a group of folks, I always think about who I'm bringing into the space with me. And so this is me at preschool. This was on Heritage Day. And so much of my time in education in the K-12 system has been about kind of feeling on the outside. I'm biracial. And this is an example. My mom put together an outfit that day, but you can see all the students were dressed up, and really thinking about how much of sort of our educational experiences were all of the parts of our identities encouraged or cultivated at school. And so I think about how can I really create an environment for my students to really feel like they belong. And so part of that is really helping my students identify and get to know themselves at their core. We talk about developing that critical self-love. And for some of us, we all come from a space and place, right? And we come from, our ancestors come from a specific culture or ethnicity. And for some of us, it's about reconnecting. For some of us, it's about celebrating that, but really having the opportunity to spend time getting to know ourselves, spend time getting to really understand about how we got to where we are today, so we can really reimagine a brighter future together, a more just and equitable one. I also bring my family. This is my husband. We've been married for 16 years, going on 16, and these are my 4 beautiful kids. And I bring my students. This was my first ethnic studies course 2 years ago, and my mentor since I was a middle schooler is Erin Jones, and you could see that she was in class that day. And the space that is created in my classroom is not about me. It's about providing an opportunity for my students, again, to get to know themselves so they can get to know one another better. And this is also us, some of our students at the Northwest Teaching for Social Justice Conference. And we were there really learning how to engage in action. So I tell my students what is learned here, or what is what's talked about here stays here, teaching about confidentiality, but what is learned here has to leave here. And so what is their sort of responsibility to engage in collective action? And so when I first became an educator, I really thought about equality and equity. That's really what I was focused on. That's why I became a teacher. And I really, really wanted to see us make some strides as an institution to become more equitable. But then I really started to understand that it's actually about justice and liberation. It's actually about removing those systemic barriers that hold some of our students back, often our students furthest from educational justice. And so really thinking about what sort of systemic impact can I have in helping remove those barriers for students. So I can have an impact in my classroom directly with students one-on-one, but then taking it a step further, how can I engage with the system to really shift the material conditions for my students? And so my role in the social change ecosystem, when I think about it, is a bridge builder. I think part of that comes from my nature, being biracial, always feeling like I'm on the outside, out sort of the periphery of things, but really understanding that we all play an integral role, and we all have a unique gift that helps us to really be specifically suited for that goal or that area of gifting. And so really the foundation for us, if we're really going to start to reimagine and shift, it's relationships. It's relationships that are intentional. It's relationships where our students feel seen, where our colleagues feel trusted, where we feel like we are getting to know one another, and our relationships are not transactional, but they are reciprocal, where it's not about what we can get, but it's really centered on what we can give. And Vero, she's one of my mentors for sure. And she always says how community is a verb. So as we build our classroom community, as we build the culture of our school community or our workplace community, wherever you are as an educator, I'm really thinking about this is something that must be continuously built over time. It must be intentional, and it must be something that we continue to attend to. It's sort of like my garden right now. Whew, I'm starting a garden, and I'm not the best at keeping plants alive. So I told you I have 4 kids. I've kept them alive, but my plants, not so much. And so really thinking about what good would it be if I planted my plants at the beginning of the season, and then I left them. And I was like, whew, got that done. Right? They wouldn't make it. And so really thinking about our relationships with our students, with our colleagues, with our community are the same. We cannot approach them as the sort of one and done situation. How are we continuing to cultivate them? How are we continuing to grow them? How are we continuing to weed and tend to the soil and really help build those partnerships and relationships? And so really what undergirds all the work that I do and is really this idea that I got to hear from Jeff Duncan Andrade a couple months ago. And he talks about wellness. And so wellness is the harmonizing of mind, body, emotion, and spirit. He says it's cultivated and sustained through healthy relationships that are responsive to the lived experience and the historical and material conditions that shape them. Community responsive wellness, though, strengthens the sacred link between self-actualization and community actualization in 3 ways. The first way is through that inner self. That's that self-love. That's that connection to our culture, identity, and agency. That's our ability to create action on the individual level. Then there's the interpersonal level. So this is a rootedness and commitment to showing empathy towards family, community, and peers. And I would actually say it's even more than empathy, it's actually solidarity. And then the last one is interconnectedness. This is positive interrelatedness to ancestors, place, land, and the natural world. So that's our connection to place, time, and space. And what this does is this grows ecosystems where people and communities are able to experience place, power, purpose, awareness, resilience, empathy, hope, love, and joy. And that's my dream, y'all. Like, that's my dream for us. That's my dream for you. That's my dream for every one of my students, to feel so seen, to be able to be well, and really having that solidarity that if I'm well, but you are sick, then we are collectively unwell. And so how do we develop that in our students? How do we develop that in our communities, that we show up for one another, that even if it doesn't impact me directly, that I still feel the need to show up and act on behalf? All right, so some things to think about. Some ways that I do that in my classroom is through wellness. We talk about mindfulness. And so, but the idea is critical mindfulness. So this great quote, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. So some folks would say self-care is bubble baths and facials. And I would say that's good sometimes, but also self-care is, I like to think of it more as community care. So what does that look like? What is going to help sustain myself and my family to continue to engage in systemic change? How are we learning how to endure? How are we learning to have joy amidst hard situations? That's really what critical mindfulness is all about. So how are we able to cultivate that in our lives, in our colleagues' lives, and in our students' lives? Another way is we recite In Lakesh together. This is something that every day we remind ourselves that you are my other me. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself. And so really understanding that critical aspect of solidarity and interconnectedness as we create the cultures in our classroom. So this question, I love this question that y'all talked about today, is what is education really for? What are we really trying to accomplish? And I think this is something that we collectively need to decide. And as we finish out this school year very, very soon, and then we start to sort of recalculate and get started to how we're going to open in the fall, honestly, I'm very nervous that some folks are just going to return to quote this quote unquote normal, this idea that when things are challenging, it's often easiest to resort back to sort of the status quo or what we've been doing. And so really thinking about what are the things that we need to do to really push back against the comfortable, to push back against sort of the way that we've been doing it, knowing that it hasn't been serving all of our students well. And so really thinking about that first aspect is that critical self-love. So how are we developing love, critical self-love in our students? And I would really advocate that the way that we start to develop it in our students is by modeling it for them. So how have you developed self-love? How have you really learned about your connection to place, time, and space? How have you learned about your family history and understanding your positionality as the educator in the room or in the office that you hold? How have you really started to think about that critically and really helping to then develop that empathy, compassion to land in solidarity? It's also about prioritizing and centering our students furthest from educational justice. We know that by centering them, it will benefit all of our students. We also know that we need to teach the whole child and center their social emotional needs, but we can't just rely on social emotional learning. We need to make sure it has an anti-racist and a trauma-informed lens. We need to make sure that we aren't inflicting harm as we are trying to undo it, really attending to our impact and not just our intent. We need to center restorative practice and healing in our schools instead of just punishment. So this says it's relationships, not programs, that change children. Young people thrive when adults care about them on a one-to-one level and when they have a sense of belonging to a caring community. So how are we fostering that sense of belonging? Every discretionary moment we have an opportunity to communicate to students that they belong, that they are worthy, that they have value, and that they are scholars. How are we making sure that we do that every single day? Another thing that we need is for students to learn about mirrors, windows, and ladders. So mirrors are ways for them to learn about themselves, and windows are ways for them to see and relate to one another. And ladders, this is a term from Sonia Renee Taylor that she talks about. This is how we need to understand the system and really understand that the system is working as it was created to. So how does knowing how the system works then impact how we are able to sort of carry out change? So thinking about an ethnic studies lens. So we need courses that are embedded with ethnic studies for us to be able to historicize where we are today, to help students learn about themselves and one another, and developing that empathy and compassion, ultimately landing in solidarity. So we need training in culture responsive pedagogy. That's where we put students' lives, culture, and funds of knowledge at the center of the curriculum. We need culturally sustaining pedagogy that validates and understands students' funds of knowledge and experience, that we get to see our young people as whole instead of broken as they enter school. And we need to develop a love that can work to keep them whole as they grow and expand who they can become throughout their educational journey. They don't have to leave their culture, their ethnicity, their customs at the door. They get to bring their full self into the classroom, and we welcome it. It needs to be community responsive. We need to recognize the importance of building relationships with families and communities. and really recognize how those relationships drive how we prepare young people to analyze and act on community needs. It's humanizing pedagogy. It's anti-racist, where we encourage a critique of racial oppression at the institutional, interpersonal, and internalized level. It's not just the what we teach, but it's how we're teaching it. And so some ways that we can start to shift is really thinking about how are we developing learning communities? How are we not just being the one with all the knowledge, all the content, but really creating communities where we start to shift the power dynamics, where we create a community of learners, where my students' funds of knowledge, their experience, what they've learned is validated in the classroom. They get to share their own experience. They take charge of the learning, and it's not only encouraged, but it's expected. And so students are learning from one another. I don't have to have all the answers, and that's so beautiful. That humility of not having all the answers helps to really lower the stakes of having to be perfect, having to perform in the classroom, and really allowing students to bring their whole selves. And so we have to model that authenticity. Really, again, reframing power, really thinking about how power dynamics show up in the classroom, but also in what we're learning about. How do we learn how the system prioritizes some groups over others? Again, not to assign blame. It's no one person's responsibility for where we are today, for how we got to where we are. But we need to acknowledge and be able to historicize the history, to talk openly and honestly about our history, to be able to understand where we are today, to help develop that more just and equitable future. And we don't simply acknowledge power to admire it, but to always center healing. How are we centering healing in our classroom communities? How are we helping develop counter narratives, understanding whose voices are at the table and whose have been left out, developing that criticality. This is from Freire, really teaching that we should challenge learners to examine those power structures and patterns of inequality. And also from Freire, really thinking about practice. That's that ongoing reflection between learning and practice. And so really just starting to think about, there's this whole notion of learning loss, this idea of we've lost so much in the pandemic. And yes, we have lost a lot, but also thinking about all of the skills and knowledge that our students have gained. I see my 9-year-old whizzing through technology. Those are things that we can bring into the fall as we return and reimagine school as tools that our students have learned, as things, as assets that they now will bring into the spaces. So I saw this was a couple of days ago. Goldie Muhammad posted this. Queen wrote Cultivating Genius, if you haven't read that yet. But she says the issue with the rhetoric of learning loss presumes that students were only at a loss during a pandemic, yet children, and uniquely Black children, have been at an educational loss, including loss of identity and joy, since the inception of this country being colonized. Can you lose something that systemically schools never gave you? So something to think about. And then this last, this quote I also saw, something to think about is kindness matters, but kindness does not equal justice. Civility counts, but civility is not the humane response to injustice. Justice is. Love is essential, but love is not a passive, weeping bystander. Love puts in work. So some ways that we can put in work. I know we're getting close to the time, so I'll go quickly, but how can we attend to the impact that our actions create and not just the intent? How can we lean into the uncomfortable with one another? How can we have those difficult conversations, knowing that growth comes when we're uncomfortable? How can we understand that it's more about the process than the product? It's more about engaging in the work. Adrienne Marie Brown says there is always time for the right work. So let's dig into the right work. I thought this was really interesting, that really engaging with our humanity takes humility. Just the two letters are different, but really thinking about how can we continue to have that growth mindset. Alice Walker reminds us that the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. You are all powerful educators that can just make incredible change in your communities. And how can we link arms and really develop that critical solidarity for one another, because this work is best done in community. And so really thinking about this idea of accountability. Accountability is, sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's uncomfortable, but it feels like an attack when you're not ready to acknowledge how your behavior harms others. So how can we continue to lean into those difficult conversations? How can we call each other in instead of calling each other out? And how can we work together? So I'll leave you with this last thought. Katina Love, I got to hear her, go after her a couple weeks ago. And she says, now is the time to double down on justice, not on comfort. And so thinking about, too often we think the work of fighting oppression is just intellectual. The real work is personal, it's emotional, it's spiritual, and communal. It's explicit with a deep and intense understanding that loving Blackness is an act of political resistance. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for all the ways that you support our students. And if you'd like to connect, feel free to follow me on Twitter or send me an email. Thank you so much for your time today.
Brooke, thank you so much for speaking to us today and giving us this great send-off of hope and thoughtfulness and a dream for our future. Thank you guys so much for attending the conference. We really appreciate it. Remember to hop on Twitter tonight, 4:30 to 5:30. And just really appreciate all of your hard work and thoughtfulness today. All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone.